on the public, great. Being on the public-facing side, it's very difficult to obtain data that is more advanced, like player tracking data or some of the sensory data that teams have to track players, their force and their load, and thinking about how high they jump or how far they run and that sort of thing. We don't have access to that sort of data on the public side, and so the next best thing was working with data from Pro Sports Transaction. So Pro Sports Transaction is a website that collects data on any transaction for all professional sports, all the major ones. And so as you can see below, there's a little snapshot of what the data looks like. So for me, the objective is to take this data and create a more robust data set that is really going to stem from these notes here. So as you can see, in this this date is obviously inaccurate, and I accounted for this in my analysis, but just for example's sake, we have the date, team, acquired, and relinquished, which basically means this person is going to be active in the particular game or active in general, and then this person's going to be inactive. And then the notes. So the notes details what's going on with this particular player, what type of injury, and that sort of information. And so there's a lot of valuable information in this text data in each observation. And so the objective for me was to be able to use that information to develop a more robust data set. So data description. So the initial data set, as you saw, a snapshot, contains 5 variables, but the current data set is now up to 47 variables due to feature creation from the text data, and also adding in data from Basketball Reference, which I will talk a little bit about later. So these transactions span from 1947 till the present. There's a couple limitations with this data. There's a historical completeness issue. I am not entirely sure that all injuries from 1947 are tracked. Otherwise, the 1940s and 50s had it pretty good. But I would love to kind of do a little deeper dive and try to find more data. And then also too, there's a lack of common keys. So, when you collect data from one source, and this source doesn't even have a primary key, which is a unique identifier identifying each row to make sure that the data set is indeed valid. And so for me, having to understand, okay, as I collect more data, what are going to be ways that I can connect that data to another data set? And eventually this will all move to a database that I'll either hold on my local machine, or I will put out in the cloud to ease the process of retrieving the data and using it for analysis. So how I retrieve this data. So as you saw a couple slides back right here. So you look here, this is directly from the website. And now this is the data that is in my local environment in my IDER studio. So I used RVest and Tidyverse to scrape data from the Pro Transactions website. And so in doing this, it allows me to collect data, be able to transform that data any way that I please. And then I also use Pandas and Beautiful Soup for Basketball Reference in Python. So I created a very comprehensive scraper that is nested to account for various factors in order to grab the unique identifier for each player, grab all the game logs for that particular player's career, and doing all of that for every player that has ever played. So that took a bit of time to get in terms of accuracy of getting everything that I needed, but I did develop a scraper that successfully collected such data. Now, the the only thing is, so there is a little bit of ABA data in the injury data set. I forgot to collect that, so that's kind of the next step as well, as I think about in the future making sure I grab some of the ABA data. The ABA was a league that rivaled the NBA until they eventually merged in I believe it was the 70s, the early 80s. So text mining. So text mining is a way to analyze data and to better understand what exactly you're working with in terms of wording. And so what what you can see here is a word cloud. So a word cloud is simply just a graphic that shows, you know, a larger word, like the larger the word, the more frequent that word appears in a tokenized data set. And so what a tokenized data set is essentially all this, this string data here that you see here, every particular token, which is going to be like illness, or this particular token here, day to day, fracture legs, like each one is going to have its own line, have its own row with date, time, acquired or relinquished, illness, and then there'd be another row with the same thing, except it's going to be day to day. And so you tokenize it, you tokenize it so that you can, one, filter out words that aren't really needed in the data set, and also to understand, you know, what are the frequent words? What are some things that, you know, are very common in the data set? And so thinking about the initial data set that has 5 variables, you know, tokenizing that data expanded it greatly, but it also gave me an understanding of, okay, this is what I need, this is what I don't need. And so right here, you have the top words that are most frequently seen in this particular data set. And what you see here is that knee, ankle, and back are very, very significant in terms of the amount of times that they show up in each row in the data set in general. And so now we're going to take a look at some numbers behind it. So looking at this bubble plot, which I created in Tableau. Tableau is a visualization software, a common BI tool used by many companies. I spent a lot of time using this tool at ISOMS last summer, or not last summer, but summer 2019. And what you can see here is a bubble plot that is based on word frequency. And so here again, you can see a few more different ways of visualizing the data. And so as you can see, once again, knee, back, ankle, those are very prominent in terms of frequency, and then foot and hamstring follow from there. And there are a lot of other injuries as well that aren't seen. I just wanted to highlight the ones that are more important. So here we have the top 10 injuries on this side in this bar chart. As you can see, some numbers behind it. So these are simply the frequencies of these words appearing in the data set. And so what Pro Sports Transaction tries to do is say, okay, each row you see in the data set is supposed to be someone who missed a particular game for this particular injury. So thinking about the completeness of it, if it were complete all the way, I'm sure it'd be more. But for what the data set has, for what the website has, this is the order in which the injury frequencies fall within. So there's about 7,000 knee injuries in this data set, just under 6,000 ankle injuries, and 3,000 back injuries. And thinking about why knee injuries and ankle injuries overwhelm these other types of injuries, when you think about basketball itself, there's a lot of change of direction. There's a lot of force and load. There's jumping and twisting and turning and lateral movement. And you're just doing so many different motions on a wood surface, which is a hard surface as well. It's very it can be tough on your joints, especially if there isn't great support under the parquet floor. So it's very common. I've dealt with 2 severe knee injuries and a plethora of ankle injuries while playing the game. So and a back injury, and a hamstring. So I've pretty much done all these injuries at some point. So that's kind of what comes with the game, you know, in terms of the way that it's played. So feature development. So remember, and I'm gonna go back here. So now you see this data set, right? We have 5 variables. So now we're gonna start developing more variables. We want to add more features to this data set. So once we get to the point where we want to start modeling and kind of understanding, you know, how these different injuries might impact player performance, we'll have more to work with. We'll have a more diverse and a greater number of variables to run models. And so what I did was I used string matching and regular expressions within the string matching to identify words in each note, which the note is the description of what injury or what transaction occurred. And so this is just a snapshot of some of the many features. So whether or not this person had surgery, a bruise, a cut, sprain, tear, broken, etc. And basically what this code is doing, and I wrote this in R. I kind of worked back and forth between R and Python. There's just some things that I'm better at in one than the other. And so in working in the same project environment, it was really easy to go back and forth. But you have features for each one. And basically it's an if statement saying, okay, if the surgery is in the description, make this a 1, if not 0, which essentially is not even essentially, it is a binary variable. And so just having binary variables for all these different injury types will allow me to do some more modeling later on in my research. And so this is a little snapshot of on the left, just how I scraped basketball reference and grabbing the unique identifiers so that I can have a primary key. Remember that unique identifier for each row, a primary key for a player to have a unique identifier so that I can eventually merge that information over to the injuries data set, which I had to use fuzzy merge because there is no exact foreign key. So I used the player, team name, and season from both sides to fuzzy merge, and it did a pretty good job. I had to do some of it manually after the fact, so I want to be able to improve my fuzzy merging, or maybe develop something myself that will do a better job of doing it, so I don't have to manually enter in names. It's all about efficiency. So future work. So moving forward, and this is just a tidbit. I've already tapped into some of these aspects already, but just thinking about if you're going to do a research project like this, thinking about some of the next steps that you'd want to take. So I want to definitely get into some modeling, try to see how these features impact game performance. And so what would happen is I collected a bunch of game log data. I collected every game log data, like I said earlier. And so what the plan is to, and I've already done this, but use the merge data with the game log and the injury data to then understand, or to then model from there. And then I want to improve my fuzzy merging algorithm like I was talking about earlier. I also want to get some automation going. So I want to get these scrapers automated as, the NBA finals wraps up. I want to be able to add, more of that data in. Also, if I want to add other sports, I want to be able to do that as well. And I want to create a dashboard. I want to be able to have a tool where people can, go ahead and look at my analysis and kind of have their own tool to play around with. And then I want to incorporate more data. So looking at other sites to get more transaction data or injury data to see if it can supplement any potential missing information. I want to thank Abe Maldonado and NYC Media Lab for this opportunity to speak to you all. This was such a pleasure for me. Wanted to thank Philip Chang, who was the inspiration behind this project, who's been awesome in mentoring me throughout this process. Cody Topper in Memphis Analytics for the work that we've done, Aborn and Company, and Harrison Merrick, my buddy, who helped me out with this project as well. If you want, you can follow me on GitHub at CFlight 2017. I'm going to post some more code examples in the coming weeks. Just want to clean up my code so that it's really accessible. It's really important to have well-commented code for reproducible research. I want to make sure that I can provide that. And then you can add me on LinkedIn. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Christian, so much. Really appreciate it. If you could turn off the share.
Great.
And then we'll start a dialogue.
Okay.
We got a lot of great people in here. Feel free to raise your hand or ask the questions in the session chat or Q&A. I have some here ready to go.
Okay.
Would love, there's a lot of, great minds in this session that would love to get their thoughts as well.
Hopefully I answer these questions.
So and I know a little bit about sports and college sports. I particularly follow college football pretty closely, and I wonder where they are with analytics as well. My favorite team's coach mentions that he uses a lot of tools and subscribes to a lot of software programs. But with sports programs having varying budgets, right? Like especially at the college level, and the NBA doesn't have the same kind of cap that the other leagues have. Do you see teams that can afford a fully fleshed out analytics team having an unfair advantage over those that don't?
At the end of the day, analytics is a resource. And so how you utilize that resource is what's going to create that advantage. I really think that It just depends. You know, some coaches use analytics very in depth and some don't. I really think at the college level, it's more about who you recruit and getting the best players. And analytics just helps us to have information that we need. For instance, like Coach Topper will have the reports on the sideline with him just to have like strengths and weaknesses, looking at, okay, who are the best free throw shooters, who are the best rebounders, who should we foul, you know, certain things like that anyone can really put together. But in the way that we do it in such a way where it's, you know, accessible. We do it in a way that it's easy to read and to be easy to implement. And at the end of the day, you know, we're all volunteers. Like none of us get paid. And so at the end of the day, if you have a coaching staff that wants it, there's plenty of publicly available data on the college level that you can take and recreate. Especially if you can get your hands on any play-by-play data, that's very valuable. And there's play-by-play data at a bunch of different sites.
That's publicly available? That could be web scraped, the play-by-play data?
Absolutely. If you want to, for sure. You could, you know, sometimes ESPN has it, but I know you can get it off of Sports Reference, which is where we get a lot of our data. So that's definitely a place to look if you're looking to kind of develop your own at your college.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. So a question from the chat. What is something that surprised you while working with this data?
What surprised me with working with this data is, okay, I want to talk about the data itself. So I would say what surprised me the most was just looking at how many different types of injuries and different things that have kept people out from playing. Because it's not just like a sprained wrist or a sprained ankle. Like you also have like certain illnesses, or you might have people who are dealing with, you know, heart issues, and like seeing words that I've never seen before. I'm just like, what is this? And so, you know, deciphering those things and understanding whether or not it's worth keeping given the amount of times it might happen. So some of these things might be outliers and stuff like that. I would say what was surprising in general was just how powerful text mining is in creating such a data set, but also too like how difficult it is to ensure that you're cleaning the data properly and ensuring that you're kind of accounting for everything that's in the data set. It's very time consuming. You honestly spend more time cleaning data when you're doing research projects on your own than you actually do analysis. Because once you get to the analysis part, after you clean the data, it's way easier.
I wonder, so this wasn't a question posted, but it just came up to me. So in football, they found that the shelf life of a running back has lessened over the years. And so they're now having like running back committees, right? Rather than relying on what they call like a bell cow, right? One guy to carry 30 carries. So now you have 3 guys carrying 10 carries each, 10 to 12 carries. Have you seen a correlation with like a certain position getting more injured?
That's a good question. I would say that's something that I'm going to look into. I haven't done yet. I could probably look at it in a few minutes, but for the sake of this workshop, I can't. But definitely would love to look into that. Honestly, if I had to guess, it's definitely going to be the bigger players. So like your post players, most likely. That's my assumption. I don't know that for a fact, but given the size,
on the 4 or 5 position.
Yeah, given their size and stature, they generally have more feet and ankle problems and knee problems than guards do. I think that's just an assumption. I don't know if it's true or not, because also thinking about guards too, like the way they're playing fast paced, they're explosive. You know, I'm not sure, but if I had to guess, I would say post players. But that's something I'm definitely going to incorporate into my analysis and something I'm going to look into as I continue to slice and dice my data.
I remember the old pictures of Patrick Ewing just having both ice packs on his knees every time he was on the bench.
Indeed.
Sure. So currently in the NBA, are there any teams that ascribe more to analytic usage now than other teams? And can we see it in their style of play with the naked eye? So you know, if you think of like Moneyball with like the Oakland A's, you know, who's the Oakland A's equivalent now in basketball?
So when you think about the way the game has changed over the last 5 years or so, with the come up of the Warriors, I would say, you know, the Warriors were kind of the Moneyball team. Beginning. I mean, in terms of the way they played, where their shot distribution is you think about the shot distribution and the type of players they had. I mean, Clay Thompson and Steph Curry weren't highly, highly favored prospects coming out. I mean, they were obviously first round picks and whatnot, but no one was projecting them to be the best shooting backcourt of all time. And the reason why they were able to get a guy like Kevin Durant was because they had the cap space. And so I think that, I mean, Golden State definitely uses analytics, and they've been using analytics for a while. And I know when Steve Kerr came on, they definitely use it a lot more. But there are definitely teams that use it more than others, and I think that's more of a reflection of the coaching staff. I know there's definitely there can be, and this is all from things that I've read in the media and heard. It's not from my own experience of what I know from like personal experience, but there's a lot of like where the discord comes usually is between management and coaching staff. Say most front offices these days are going to be using analytics. Everyone has an analytics team these days, and so it's just a matter of how they're using it in their day-to-day. They might use it more in their roster management than they do actually in their coaching style or in player development and whatnot. So it really depends. But I would say, I mean, the Warriors were, but I would say, honestly, you think about the Heat. I mean, the Heat are definitely one of those teams. And one of my mentors works for the Heat, and he was telling me about how they found Tyler Hero, who was all rookie this year, and he's been playing very well in the playoffs. He was telling me about how their models identified him as someone that was going to be really good, and they picked him way ahead of what he was projected in the draft. And they're able to find guys like that, guys like him, guys like Duncan Robinson, guys like Kendrick Nunn, who came out the G League. And I think it's not just analytics with that; it's also their player development as well. So there's a lot of different factors, but they also identify people through analytics. So I would say the Heat, like presently, is definitely that team, because no one could have told me, beginning of the year, that they'd be in the finals.
Wow. Yeah. No, and you can see it with Heroes play. So do these analytics go hand in hand with players wearing performance tracking devices and wearable data, biometric data? Or, is this more outside looking in? And are we going to learn more about performance data by more of these devices being integrated into what they wear throughout games, not just practices?
Yeah, so that's actually a really great question. For my perspective right now is outside looking in. So this data that I collected is strictly public facing, but I did forget that the NBA does have certain metrics that they show on their website, so you can look at how far someone ran, or like who's in the best condition and that sort of stuff. So there's information like that on the website, but it's not like retrievable in such ways as the data is. But there are definitely a lot. That data is definitely being tracked. I mean, from the people who I know in the league, they use that data, to identify lineup fatigue. So it's saying, understanding, okay, when should we make substitutions based on, players and their stamina. And when they do workouts, they're tracking that stuff too. So there's a lot of data that they're tracking behind the scenes that, we're not going to have access to, obviously, because of medical and all that other stuff. But that stuff is definitely being tracked, and it's definitely going to be continued to track. And I think that as more data is being collected, they're going to be able to do a better job of preventing injuries and developing more stylized, more analytically driven player development programs and recovery rehab programs as well. So I think that's definitely for sure going to happen.
Yeah, I have the Oura ring, and Oura partnered with the NBA. It's a body fitness tracking, performance tracking ring, and it was deemed as the best one for like sleep tracking. And obviously now like the Apple Watch is trying to catch up on a lot of, things that both Whoop and Oura came out with. But they indicated Oura, the ring, as being an indicator, an identifier of COVID symptoms, like a week before you came on with symptoms, because it showed like heart rate variability, respiratory rate. So I can look at my app and see, I take about 14, 15 breaths a minute. So if I see that I'm now taking 17, 18, 19 breaths a minute and I'm struggling, then that's one of the indicators that they've identified. And I'm sure if they see that with the players, I don't know if the players are wearing the rings during the games, but they might be wearing it, during practices and through other ways. For the other folks that are on the attendee list, if you do have a live question, for the end of this, I will allow you to talk. So if you want to ask a verbal question, just hit that raise hand button. and identify yourself, and I'll press the allow to talk button, and let you guys chime in. So what's next for you? And where are you going next after this? What's the next project? I think we'd love to follow you along on your journey, wherever it goes next. So please keep us posted and let us know what you're doing now.
Yeah, so I want to continue to work on the project that I spoke on today. Want to be able to incorporate more modeling and NLP to more easily identify the types of injuries that are coming in through the text data. So that's what I want to do for right now. In terms of future work, aside from that, doing a lot of work for Memphis, trying to help them, try to continue to work on the development that we've been doing for the last year or so, incorporating some new aspects and trying to standardize some more procedures. But in terms of personal work, that's what I'm doing for right now. I know I really want to look into high school data and trying to identify ways to collect enough data where I can identify who are going to be, good college players. And so that's kind of the next thing that I want to work on. It's going to be very difficult just because of the amount and accessibility of that kind of data, but that's something that I'm interested in looking into for sure. I had a friend of mine who did a similar project, and so I'm going to look to him for some guidance on that.
Do you think that might impact how high school players get recruited by them being able to showcase more data matrix of things that maybe weren't captured on film?
I think that's interesting. I think it would definitely benefit a lot of players, especially players who like play on really good teams, but are not necessarily the star. It's hard for their value to be quantified when being recruited, just because like there really isn't that much data out there. And so I know the EYBL, the Nike circuit. I know they've been collecting data the last couple of years to see that. But I think it would be a fascinating way to get recruited. Actually, it is, because along with the three things that I mentioned, I actually also am a college basketball coach as well. So I coach at Amherst College with the women's basketball program. And there was a recruit whose information I retrieved from their high school coach. And they had their plus minus stuck out to me. And plus minus is basically just like an efficiency stat that's based on a bunch of different on-court metrics. And so when I saw her plus minus and I saw, her stat line, I was like, okay, like she doesn't score 20 points a game, but like she averages, this and this, and she's created a lot of opportunities for her team and has created a lot of points for her team. And so, and then she's also, I'm never going to make an assumption in terms of plus minus when it comes to defense, but watching her film, she's a pretty good defender. But it's just really cool to be able to see, that high schools are now tracking that kind of stuff. Like if I had plus minus in high school, I probably would have went D1.
You playing for Duke.
Instead of being a director of analytics, I would have been playing for Memphis. No, I'm joking. I wasn't that good. But yeah, no. So I think that's gonna be really cool to see, how, because especially film providers like Synergy and Crossover who collect video and then they collect that data, being able to have access to that data and seeing how that's gonna, I don't think Crossover exists anymore. I think Crossover is about Huddle. But companies like those, seeing what they're gonna, how they're gonna use data, because that's a very
layer to their platforms.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I have 3 more questions, so let's see if we can get some quick answers to these.
Okay.
And they are coming in from the community, so thank you so much for sharing those. Are there any sports that are easier to be more analytical, data-driven, or are some sports harder? If so, why?
Yeah, so baseball is definitely regarded as like the godfather of analytics, because baseball is a much more independent sport. Like there's a pitch that's thrown and you swing and you try to hit the ball, and there are fielders who try to, stop the ball from either going out of the park or going out outfield, whatever. And so because of all the independent events that happen in baseball, it's a lot easier to analyze. Whereas in basketball, like in terms of quantifying individual performance, Whereas in basketball, it's 5-on-5. There are a lot of dependencies. Like the way you play might not necessarily be because like your performance from a statistical perspective might not necessarily be because of you individually. It could be a multitude of factors. It could be the style of play that your coach is playing you. It could be your teammates that are around you, and it also could be what kind of defenses are you facing every night in comparison to the matchup that you have on your own team. And so there's definitely a lot more dependencies in that way. Same thing with hockey. And hockey is progressing a lot in their analytics endeavors. I know that they haven't done a lot in comparison to where the NBA is and MLB is, but they're definitely on the come up in terms of the stuff that they're doing, especially with their tracking data that they have. And there's some really cool websites that have some really awesome hockey data as well. But those like more dependent sports like that, even soccer, there's a really cool. That's really cool thing about it though. When you think about how these sports relate, like basketball and hockey are very similar in terms of their stuff, like the way the dependencies are, and even soccer. And so it's really cool to be able to draw from methodologies that are used in other sports and apply it to my own work and my research. I'll have knowledge shares with my friend who works for a soccer club overseas, and it's really great to be able to have a very diverse group of people that I interact with in different sports.
Nice. That's awesome. Any advice for those looking to get started with data science or sports analytics?
So honestly, when it comes to sport analytics, it's all about, well, I'm gonna start with the data science first. So if you're looking to get into data science, there are a lot of really great textbooks if you want to look into specific areas of data science. Then there's a lot of online information. The way I got started was I majored in stats in undergrad, so I kind of had a little training, but I got more serious about it when I got out, and so I did some free online courses to start to kind of get my feet wet. Then I did a couple certification programs to understand more. But there's a lot of reproducible research. I would suggest if you don't, but I like Medium a lot because there are a lot of people who are putting out great reproducible research, and so I go there to learn about new topics. I'm reading an article almost every day about something new, and that's stuff that you can take and apply right away. And so I would say it's a good place to start. In terms of sport analytics, there's a lot of data out there to be collected. And so look into web scraping. Also look into the rules of web scraping for that particular website because they might ban your IP if you hit too much. But web scraping, definitely, if you get that tool, then you can do a lot more projects that way. So definitely develop that aspect and dive into whatever you want. There's a lot of research out there. Start with Sloan papers. So Sloan is a sports analytics conference that happens every year. If you read some of those articles, that's a great way to get started too, and to be able to get inspiration for research.
Nice. Awesome. Thank you so much. From a team building perspective, how much influence of analytics do you think it can have compared with other factors, big market, player tampering, et cetera?
That's such a front office question. I love it.
You're a front office guy now, bro.
No, I'm not. Not yet. No, I'm kidding. That's a good question. I really don't know. I don't know how to answer that question. I'm sorry. I can't really be helpful in that. That's a great question.
Like some basketball gurus are in your session.
I know. I have to really think about that one.
Yeah. Well, this has been great, and I'm rooting for you, bro. And I've been following you. We did research, and I did learn that you were also one of the first African-American, or if not the African-American male graduates in the SAS program at UMass Amherst. So, just as a person of color, a fellow person of color, seeing you out there doing big things like this as a fellow nerd, really excited for you, and would love to share your story with other folks, especially young people of color that are looking to get into the space and have a passion for basketball, and maybe have this be a transcending way to transition into data science and tech from their love of basketball. So really glad to see you out there as a shining example of that. Where can we find you? On Twitter or LinkedIn?
I'm on LinkedIn. Just look for my name, Christien Wright. And then if you want to follow me on Twitter, am I able to, do I have access to this chat?
You might, yeah.
I don't know how to do it.
And I think if you guys follow us on the Media Lab Twitter, I think we posted you. Or Coach _C Wright, is that right?
I think it's Coach C underscore Wright. I just made that Twitter like a month ago, but I think it's Coach C underscore Wright.
All right, it's one of those.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But you could, but if any of you have any questions or want advice or mentorship, feel free to reach out. I would love to help. Without people who are supporting me, like Abe, I wouldn't be here right now. So I would love to be a sounding board and a resource to you, if I can be.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us. Have a great weekend, everybody, and jump into the main thing. I think we're going to do a quick outro. Have a great week, and thank you, everybody, for joining.
Much love. Thank you.